Snow falls slow and steady over the loading dock behind the county morgue, and inside, under a single fluorescent tube, a flag-draped casket sits alone on a steel gurney with no one standing beside it. It has sat there for 9 days. The flag is folded wrong at one corner, tucked rather than pressed, the way a man does a thing he does not believe anyone will check. A paper tag hangs from the handle on a loop of twine. Nobody has read it. Nobody has come. Gunnery Sergeant Wade Holloway did not come to read it either. He came to fix a furnace. He stamped the cold off his boots at the service door of Merrill County's intake building, a low brick box on the edge of Hartselle Crossing where the road gave up its name and turned to gravel. His German shepherd waited at his left knee where the dog always waited, ears up, breath fogging in the unheated bay. The dog's name was Cinder, and Cinder did not like the building. Holloway felt it through the leash before he understood it himself. A stiffness in the dog's shoulders, a slow lowering of the head. A man met him at the door with a clipboard and a smile that arrived too fast. He wore a clean charcoal overcoat that had no business in a furnace room, and his shoes were the kind that had never crossed gravel. "You're the heating fellow," the man said. "Pryor County contracts. The thermostat's been fighting us all week." Holloway nodded once. He rarely spoke first. Years of standing post had taught him that the man who talks least learns most, and Merrill County was paying him by the hour to learn what was wrong with the furnace, nothing more. Pryor led him down a corridor lit by failing tubes, past a door marked storage, past a door marked nothing at all. The cold deepened as they walked. Holloway had spent enough winters in places without heat to know the difference between a building that was broken and a building that had been let go on purpose. And this one had the second kind of cold, the kind that saves money. "Furnaces through here," Pryor said, and opened the last door, and the cold came out to meet them like a held breath. It was the holding room, concrete floor, a drain at the center, 2 gurneys against the wall. One was empty. On the other sat the casket and the flag, and the tag swinging gently in the draft from the open door. Cinder moved first. The dog crossed the room before Holloway could check the leash, not lunging, not barking, but walking with the deliberate care of an animal approaching something it has decided matters. Cinder stopped at the head of the casket, sat and looked back at Holloway with the steady attention he had seen exactly twice before in 11 years of working beside this dog. Both times a person had been hurt and could not say so. "He shouldn't be in here," Pryor said. The smile had not moved, but something behind it had. "Sanitation." "Furnace is over there," Holloway said, and pointed at the unit in the far corner without looking at it. He was looking at the tag. "If this is the kind of story that stays with you, the kind that asks you to sit with it a while, stay until the end. It earns the ending." He crossed the room. Cinder did not move, only leaned a fraction closer to the casket, the way the dog leaned toward people he had decided to guard. Holloway crouched. The tag was county stock, a half sheet of cardboard gone soft with the cold, and on it someone had written in ballpoint a case number, a date, and a name. The name was Elias Rourke. Holloway read it twice. The pressure in his chest tightened unexpectedly, the way it did when a road he thought he knew turned out to lead somewhere he had been before. He had carried a man named Elias Rourke out of a collapsed stairwell in a country he no longer named out loud. Addend, he had known a Corporal Rourke who fixed radios nobody else could fix and who kept a photograph of a dog in his helmet liner and who had, the last Holloway heard, gone home to Michigan and disappeared the way some men disappear quietly into work and silence and the slow grinding years. "You know that name?" Pryor asked. His voice had changed, smoothed itself out. "Go on careful." "Maybe," Holloway said. That answer stayed in the room longer than he expected. Cinder had not stopped watching the casket. Holloway stood, and his knees told him he was 43, and the furnace in the corner ticked uselessly, and the snow kept falling outside the high frosted window where no light came in. He looked at the folded flag, at the wrong-tucked corner, at the tag, and he made a decision, the way he made all his decisions without announcing it. In the quiet behind his own face, he would fix the furnace. Then he would find out who Elias Rourke had been, and why no one had come for 9 days, and why a man in a clean overcoat was so eager for a dog to leave the room. He had come to Hartzell Crossing 8 months earlier for the same reason men like him came anywhere, which was that he had nowhere louder to be. After the Corps, he had drifted north through a string of jobs that asked nothing of him but his hands, repairing boilers and walk-in coolers and the wheezing furnaces of small towns that could not afford to lose their heat. He fixed things. He did not stay. Places disappeared too easily when you let them matter, and Holloway had learned to keep them at the length of a service call. Cinder had come into his life by accident. A working dog washed out of a military program for a stubbornness that the program called a flaw, and Holloway called good sense. The dog was 11 now, gray coming in around the black mask, but the instincts had not dimmed. Cinder read rooms before Holloway did. Cinder read people. When the dog sat down in front of a thing and would not move, Holloway had learned at real cost to believe him. He finished the furnace by mid-afternoon. It was not broken so much as starved. A gas valve choked half shut, and he opened it and felt the warm air begin to push back against the cold. And he thought about how easy it would have been to write a longer invoice and leave. Instead, he found Pryor in a front office that was warm. He noticed very warm, a space heater glowing orange beside a desk stacked with manila folders. "Furnace is fixed," Holloway said. "That man in the back, Rourke. What happens to him?" Pryor folded his hands. "County handles the unclaimed after the waiting period. He's cremated at the contracted facility and interred in the indigent section. It's all paid for. Taxpayers are generous in their way. Waiting period's 9 days? 10. Pryor's smile returned. He has one more. Then it's out of everyone's hands. Holloway looked at the folders on the desk. He could not read them from where he stood, but he counted them. 11. 11 folders. And a man who got warm by his space heater while the holding room stayed cold enough to save a dime. Funny thing, Holloway said. Flags folded wrong. The smile held, but Pryor's hand moved to the nearest folder and squared it against the others, a small, unnecessary motion, the kind a man makes when he wants his hands to look busy. "We do our best with what we're given," Pryor said. Holloway left. Cinder walked at his knee through the gravel lot, and the snow had thickened, and the truck took 3 tries to start. He sat in the cab with the heater roaring and his hands not yet warm, and he did not drive. He thought about a corporal who fixed radios. He thought about 10 days. He thought about a man dying somewhere in this county and lying 9 days in a cold room while 11 folders waited on a warm desk, and for some reason he could not find indifference anywhere inside himself. He drove into town instead of home. Hartzell Crossing had one street that mattered, and a dozen that did not. He parked outside the only place still lit, a diner with a hand-painted sign and steam fogging the windows from the inside, and he tied Cinder to the rail under the awning where the dog could see the door, and he went in to ask the only question he knew how to start with, which was whether anybody had known a man named Alias Rourke. The woman behind the counter was past 70, small and straight-backed, with white hair pinned tight and hands that had worked their whole lives. Her name, stitched in faded thread on her apron, was Nora. She set a cup of coffee in front of him before he asked for one. "You're the furnace man," she said, "out at the county place. Word travels. Word's all we've got out here." She studied him. "You don't look like you came in for the pie." "I came in to ask about somebody." He turned the cup a quarter turn on the saucer. Elias Rourke, the cloth in Nora's hand, stopped moving. It stopped for only a moment, but Holloway had spent his life watching for the moment a person's body answered before their mouth did, and Nora's body had answered. She set the cloth down. She looked at the window, at the snow, at the dog tied beneath the awning watching the door. "Where did you hear that name?" she said. "That it was not quite a question." "It's on a tag in a cold room," Holloway said, "hanging off a casket. Nobody's claimed. 9 days now." Nora sat down across from him, which she had not done for any customer Holloway could see all evening, and for a long moment she did not speak. When she did, her voice had dropped to something private. "Elias Rourke fixed my radio," she said. "The big console set my husband left me. Nobody else would touch it. Elias came out, must be 6 years back, and he sat on my floor a whole afternoon and got it singing again, and he wouldn't take a dime." She pressed her lips together. "He kept to himself after the service. Lived out past the quarry road in his father's old place. Folks stopped seeing him. You know how it goes. A man gets quiet, and the quiet gets quieter, and then one day you realize you can't remember the last time. He had family. A sister." Nora's hands tightened on each other. "Somewhere they had a falling out, the kind that lasts. Over their father. I always figured the way those things usually are. She left town young, before I came up here, and folks said her name less and less until they stopped saying it at all. I don't know where she went, but Elias kept her picture on the mantel all the same. I saw it when I dropped off a pie one Christmas. He turned it face down when he caught me looking, quick, the way you'd cover something you were ashamed to want." She shook her head slowly. "That man would have given you the coat off his back and the heat out of his own house. And he did, more than once, for more than one family in this town that won't admit it now. And he died in a county that didn't even fold his flag right." She got up, refilled his cup, though he had not touched it, and stood with the pot in her hand, looking at the snow. "You want to know the worst part," she said. "I knew he'd gone quiet. We all knew. And not one of us drove out the quarry road to knock. You tell yourself a man like that wants to be left alone. You tell yourself you'll go out next week. And then there's no next week, and there's a tag on a casket, and a stranger's the one who reads it." Her voice thinned. "Don't let anybody tell you the cold killed Elias Rourke. It was the leaving alone that did it." The cold just finished the job. That hit Holloway harder than he expected. He drove out to the quarry road the next morning. The snow had stopped overnight and left the world flat and white and silent. The pines bowed under their loads, the road a single set of tire tracks that were his own going out. Rourke's place was a low-frame house with a sagging porch and a stovepipe that had not smoked in some time. The door was not locked out here, Holloway thought. Doors rarely were. Cinder went in first, nose down, working the cold rooms one by one, and Holloway followed with the careful tread of a man who knows he is walking through the last days of someone's life. There was a chair pulled close to a dead wood stove, and beside it a mug with an inch of coffee frozen solid in the bottom, and a folded newspaper gone yellow, opened to a page of want ads no one would ever answer. There was a workbench in the back room crowded with the disassembled guts of radios, tubes, and coils, and a soldering iron, still seated in its stand, the whole of it laid out in an order that had meant something to one man and to no one now. A spool of solder, a magnifying glass on a hinged arm, a coffee can of screws, sorted by size, because a man who fixes things keeps his screws sorted even when no one is left to see it. Holloway stood at that bench a long moment. He knew this kind of order. He kept his own tools the same way, every wrench in its slot, every fitting in its drawer, the discipline of a man who has learned that chaos is the thing that gets people killed and that a sorted bench is a small daily argument against the dark. Elias Rourke had been making that argument alone out here for 30 years, one radio at a time, and no one had come to hear it. There was a calendar on the wall, a feed store giveaway with a photograph of a hunting dog, and the last day crossed off was 9 days before the day Holloway found the casket, which meant Elias Rourke had marked his last morning the way he marked all of them, with a small black X in the corner of the square. 9 X's into the new month, and then nothing. The rest of the days standing open and blank like a question no one had asked. He had gone out to the woodshed that morning. Holloway would learn for an armload of wood to feed a stove he would never light again, and a neighbor plowing the quarry road had found him a day later in the snow. With the wood still stacked in the crook of his arm, his heart simply stopped. To end an old man, alone in the cold, who had died doing the last useful thing he knew how to do. On the mantel, face down, was a framed photograph. Holloway turned it over. A young woman, maybe 20, squinting into a summer sun 30 years gone, her arm around a lanky young man, Holloway, recognized even across all that time the radio corporal, grinning the way he had grinned before the war took the grin out of him. On the back, in pencil, 2 words and a place: Margaret. Then the name of a town, 200 miles south. He stood in the cold house, holding the photograph, and Cinder came and leaned against his leg, and Holloway understood that he had crossed the length of a service call into something he could not bill by the hour. He would find Margaret Rourke, and he would do it before the 10th day burned her brother into the indigent section of a cemetery she did not know existed. He had 4 days. He learned that when he called the county the next morning, and a clerk friendlier than Pryor, and apparently unaware of him, told him the cremation was scheduled for Friday, that the waiting period had been extended once already, that Mr. Pryor had filed for the extension himself, and that it was, the clerk said, awfully thoughtful of him. Holloway did not think it was thoughtful. He thought about 11 folders on a warm desk and a man who knew how to fold a flag wrong on purpose, and he began quietly to count. He went back to the diner that evening, and Nora made calls for him to people he could not have reached, the way a town elder can open doors, a stranger cannot. And by the 3rd call, she had a phone number for a Margaret, who had married and changed her name and was now Margaret Calloway, and who ran, of all things, to a small clinic 200 miles south, where she had spent 30 years caring for other people's parents because she could not bring herself to care for her own. She did not believe him at first. Holloway stood in the cold outside the diner with the phone against his ear and Cinder pressed to his leg, and he told a stranger that her brother was dead. And there was a silence on the line so long he thought the call had dropped. Elias, she finally said. The name came out cracked. We didn't speak, not for 20 years. He wrote me once after our father passed. I never, answered another silence. What do they want? Money? Is this about money? "No, ma'am," Holloway said. "Nobody wants your money. There's a man in this county who wants the opposite. I just want you to know your brother's still here and there's still time, and if you come, I'll make sure you can stand beside him before anybody puts him anywhere." "Why?" she said. "Why would a stranger do this?" "Because I knew him," Holloway said. "A long time ago. He carried me once when I couldn't walk. I'd like to carry him a little ways." Now the silence this time was different. When she spoke again, her voice had changed, the way a road changes when it finally turns toward home. "It's a long drive in this snow," she said. "Take your time," Holloway said. "I'll hold the door." He went to the county building the next morning to hold it. Pryor was not glad to see him. The smile arrived, but it arrived slower, and behind it, Holloway could see a man recalculating. Cinder sat at Holloway's knee in the warm front office and watched Pryor the way the dog watched anyone he had not decided to trust, which was to say, steadily, without blinking his head very still. "The Rourke cremation," Holloway said. "I'm asking you to hold it. There's family coming, his sister. She's on the road." "That's not possible," Pryor said. "The order's filed, the facility's scheduled. These things move on rails, friend. Once they're moving, no one can stop them. You filed the extension yourself. You can file another." The smile faltered. "Who told you that?" "Doesn't matter who told me." Holloway kept his voice level, the way you keep your voice level with a dog that might bolt. "What matters is there's a man back there with a name and a sister and a flag that ought to be folded right, and you've had him 9 days, and you'd rather burn him Friday than let one phone call slow you down. I'd like to understand why." Pryor stood. He came around the desk, and for the first time the overcoat charm fell away, and what was underneath was colder than the holding room. "You're a furnace repairman," Pryor said quietly. "You came to fix a valve. You did. You got paid. Now you're standing in my office telling me how to run a county contract that has fed this town's mortuary obligations for 6 years without a single complaint. The unclaimed get a dignified disposition at a fair cost to the taxpayer. That is the service. That is all the service. Whatever you think you knew about this man, he died alone and unclaimed, and the law is very clear about what happens then." "He's not unclaimed," Holloway said. "Not anymore. He's unclaimed until someone with standing signs for him. A sister 20 years gone isn't standing. She's a story." Pryor's voice dropped further. "Go home, Sergeant. Fix furnaces. This is bigger than you." Holloway looked at the folders on the desk. "Still 11. Still squared." "How much does the county pay you per disposition?" he said. Pryor went very still. "That's what I thought," Holloway said, and he turned and walked out into the snow with his dog, and he understood that he had just learned the shape of the thing, and that learning it was not the same as proving it, and that he had 3 days. He spent them the way he had spent his whole life, watching and counting and refusing to look away. He learned by sitting in the diner and letting Nora work the room that Merrill County paid its mortuary contractor a flat fee for every unclaimed body it processed, a fee that covered cremation, an urn and interment, and that the fee was generous. The clerk had said so. Taxpayers are generous in their way. Nora knew everyone, and everyone came through the diner, sooner or later, and Holloway learned that the most powerful tool in a small town is an old woman with a coffee pot and a long memory who has decided to be on your side. She seated the right people in the booth beside his. She refilled cups slowly, so conversations ran long. A retired bookkeeper named Glenn, who had kept the county's ledgers for 19 years before his eyes, gave out, sat across from Holloway one evening and drew the whole arrangement on a napkin with a stub of pencil, the fee, the contract, the cousin, the way the money moved. Used to be, Glenn said, tapping the napkin. We got maybe one unclaimed a year out here, two in a bad winter. Folks die, but folks have people. He frowned. Last 3 years, that number's climbed, and I couldn't tell you a single new reason why. Same town, same people, more unclaimed. He set the pencil down. I always meant to ask about it. Then my eyes went, and they put a young fellow in my chair who doesn't ask anybody anything. Holloway learned that the contracted crematory was 60 miles off and run by a cousin of Pryor's. He learned that the rate the county paid had risen 3 years running, while the number of unclaimed dead in a county this small had, impossibly, also risen, and that no one had ever sat down and laid those two numbers side by side, because no one in Hartzell Crossing had ever had reason to. A man dies alone, the county pays to bury him. The contractor cashes the check, 11 folders on a warm desk. 11 names that nobody was coming for, and one fee per name, and a waiting period that Pryor could extend or end as it suited the schedule of a crematory 60 miles away. The genius of it, Holloway saw, was that the victims could not testify. They were the only witnesses to their own disappearance, and they were gone, and the system was built so that being unclaimed meant being unquestioned. A man with no one to ask after him was, to Pryor, not a tragedy but a clean transaction. Years of fixing broken machines had trained Holloway to find the one part that was wrong, but years of standing post had trained him to know that the wrong part is rarely where the trouble shows. The county was being starved somewhere upstream, and the men it starved were the ones who could not, by definition, complain, because they were dead and alone, and their flags were folded by hands that did not believe anyone would check. He did not have the proof he had a shape, and a shape is not a case. The black morning came on the third day, the day before the cremation, when Holloway drove to the county building and found the holding room empty. The gurney was bare. The casket was gone. The flag was gone. The tag was gone. For one long moment, the cold of that empty room went all the way through him, worse than any cold he had stood in overseas. The cold of arriving one morning too late, and cinder pressed against his leg and made a sound low in his chest that Holloway had never heard the dog make. Pryor found him there. Moved up, Pryor said, and he did not bother with a smile now. The facility had an opening. He went out this morning. I told you these things move on rails. Holloway did not raise his voice. That was the discipline of it, the thing the Corps had carved into him, and grief had never managed to carve back out. He stood in the empty, cold room, and he did not raise his voice, and somehow that was louder than any shout. "Where?" he said. 60 miles. By now it's done, or it's about to be. There's nothing to stand beside anymore, Sergeant. Go home. Cinder moved first. The dog did not lunge. The dog crossed the empty room to the bare gurney and put his nose to the steel where the casket had sat, and he held there, working the scent. And then he turned and walked, deliberate and certain. Not to the door Pryor stood in, but to the second door at the back of the holding room, the one marked nothing at all. And he sat down in front of it and looked back at Holloway with the steady attention that meant a person had been hurt, and could not say so. Holloway crossed to the door. Pryor stepped in front of it. "That's not yours to open." "It's the county's," Holloway said, "and I work for the county. There's a work order in my truck. Says I'm to inspect all heating units in this building. That's a heating unit behind that door, isn't it? Old boiler? I can hear it. It was not a boiler. They both knew it was not a boiler. Pryor had built his whole quiet operation on the principle that no one would ever check, and a man who has bet everything on no one checking does not know what to do when someone simply does. He stepped aside because the alternative was to put his hands on a Marine in front of a dog that had already decided about him. And whatever else Pryor was, he was not a fool. The room behind the door was a records room, cold, of course. Shelves of manila folders going back 6 years, and on a low shelf near the floor, where Cinder had already put his nose, sat a cardboard box, and inside the box, waiting, was the casket's tag, Elias Rourke, case number, date, and clipped behind it a second sheet. Holloway had not seen a disposition invoice with a fee on it and a signature, and the name of a crematory 60 miles south run by a man named Pryor. The casket was gone, yet the paper had stayed, because Pryor had needed to file it, because the fee did not come without the paper, and a man cannot cash a check for a thing he cannot document. The very greed that had moved the body had left the record behind. "He's already gone," Pryor said from the doorway, but his voice had thinned. "Maybe," Holloway said, holding the invoice up to the weak light. "But you're not." He photographed every page. He photographed the invoice and the tag and the dates and the rising fee across 3 years of folders, and he did it slowly, methodically, the way he stripped a machine, and Cinder sat at the door the whole time and did not let Pryor pass. Then Holloway made 2 phone calls. The first was to the crematory 60 miles south, where a tired voice confirmed that the morning's delivery had not yet been processed, that there was a backlog, that the Rourke casket was third in a line of 3 and would not go in until afternoon. There was still time, not much, some. The second call was to Margaret Calloway, who was, she told him, 90 minutes out and driving faster than the snow allowed. "Don't let them," she said, and her voice broke on it. "Please." "I never answered his letter. Don't let me be too late for this, too." "You won't be," Holloway said. "I'm going to him now. I'll hold the door." He drove the 60 miles with Cinder in the seat beside him and the photographs on his phone and the invoice's number burned into his memory, and he did not speed, because a man who has waited 11 years for a dog to be right does not throw it all away in a ditch. He reached the crematory as the gray afternoon was failing. He walked in with his dog at his knee and the folded copy of a county work order in his hand and the calm of a man who has nothing left to lose and everything left to do. And he asked plainly for the Rourke casket to be held, and when the cousin behind the counter began to recite the rules, Holloway laid his phone on the counter and let the man scroll through the photographs, the invoice, the signature, the cousin's own name beside Pryor's, and the recitation stopped. "I don't want trouble," the cousin said. "Then don't make any," Holloway said. "Hold the casket. His sister is 40 minutes out. After that, you and I are going to sit down with the county, and you're going to want to be the man who held the door, not the man who burned a Marine to beat a sister to the cemetery by an afternoon. You get to choose which man. Choose now." The cousin held the casket. He set it apart from the other 2 on its own gurney near the wall, and he found a clean white cloth somewhere and laid it over a folding chair beside it so the room would not look like what it was, and Holloway understood that the man had decided, in the space of one conversation, to become the person who had held the door. People will do that, Holloway had learned more often than the cynical believe. Most of them are not evil. Most of them are only tired and going along and waiting without knowing it, for someone to walk in and give them permission to do the right thing. Pryor had counted on no one ever giving that permission. He had counted wrong. While they waited, Holloway stood by the casket with his hand resting on the folded flag, and he straightened the wrong-tucked corner himself, slowly as well as a man could without the second pair of hands the fold required. Cinder lay at the gurney's foot, gray muzzle on his paws, eyes open on watch. The crematory hummed and ticked around them, a building built for endings, and into its machinery's low noise, Holloway said quietly, to no one the cousin could see, that he was sorry it had taken so long, and that the radios were still on the bench, and that somebody was coming who should have come years ago. He did not know if he believed a man could hear such things. He had stopped being sure of much. He had carried bodies out of worse places than this, and he had always talked to them on the way, because a man deserves a voice beside him even after his own has stopped, and Holloway was not going to change that now. Margaret Calloway arrived as the last light went out of the sky, a woman of 52 in a coat too thin for the north, her hands shaking, her eyes the same eyes that had squinted into a summer sun in a photograph on a dead man's mantel. Holloway met her at the door. He did not say much. He had learned that grief does not want words. It wants presence. It wants a door held open and a hand to take an elbow. And he gave her those things, and he led her into the cold back room where the casket sat, and Cinder walked ahead of them both and sat down at the head of it, the way he had sat that first day. Margaret put her hand on the flag on the wrong folded corner, and she made a sound that was 20 years long. He carried that picture. Holloway said quietly, your picture. Kept it on the mantel. Turned it face down when anybody looked. But he kept it. He paused. He didn't forget you, whatever happened. He carried you the whole way. She wept then, the way the long frozen thaw all at once. And Holloway stood beside her with his hand light on her shoulder and his dog at the casket's head. And outside the snow began again falling slow and steady over a county that had almost gotten away with it. It did not get away with it. The work Holloway had done quietly in 3 days became, in the weeks that followed, work that other people finished in the light. The photographs went to the state, not the county, because the county was the problem, and Holloway had learned long ago to skip the broken part and go upstream to where the water was still clean. An auditor came north. The 11 folders became a number that someone finally laid beside another number, the rising fee beside the rising count of the unclaimed dead, and the 2 numbers sitting at last side by side told a story that needed no narrator. Pryor did not go to prison, not at first, not in any way that satisfied the part of Holloway that had stood in a cold, empty room and felt the floor drop. Men like Pryor rarely faced the thing directly. He resigned. The contract was rewritten. The crematory cousin testified to keep himself out of it, which was its own small justice, the antagonist's own people turning on him because his own behavior had taught them he would never protect them. A new waiting period was written into the county code, longer, with a requirement that someone actually try to find the family before the state paid to make a man disappear. They named it nothing dramatic. Still, it was there, and it would outlast all of them, and somewhere down the years an unclaimed man would get a phone call made on his behalf because a furnace repairman had once refused to leave a cold room. Elias Rourke was buried on a clear, hard morning in the cemetery behind the stone church in Hartzell Crossing, in a plot that Nora had quietly arranged and the diner's regulars had quietly paid for, not the indigent section, 60 miles south, but the ground of the town he had fixed radios for and given his heat to and lived among in silence for 30 years. The town came. They came in their work coats and their good coats, the plowed drivers and the diner regulars and a clerk who had once said taxpayers were generous, and they stood in the cold around a grave for a man most of them had not known they would miss until they were asked. Two Marines, neither Holloway nor Margaret had called, came in dressed blues, because Holloway had made one more phone call, and they folded the flag again, slowly, correctly, 13 folds pressed sharp as a blade, and they knelt and put it in Margaret Calloway's shaking hands, and they said the words on behalf of a grateful nation, to a woman who had not spoken to her brother in 20 years, and would now speak to him every day for the rest of her life, at a stone with his name cut into it, right? Cinder lay at Holloway's boot, through all of it, gray-muzzled, calm. His work finished, the dog had been right, the way the dog was always right. A man had been hurt, and could not say so, and Cinder had said it for him, and would not stop saying it until somebody listened. Margaret found Holloway afterward by the truck, as the others drifted back toward the warm diner, and the snow held off, and the sun lay thin and gold across the stones. "I don't know how to thank you," she said. "You didn't know him." "Not really. Not for years. I knew enough," Holloway said. "He carried me once. I owed him the same. Where will you go now? Nora says you don't stay anywhere." Holloway looked back at the town, at the diner window fogged, warm and gold against the cold, at the stone church, at the fresh grave where a flag was folded right at last. He thought about how easily places disappeared when you let them, and how this one had not, how this one had reached up out of a cold room and a soft cardboard tag and a dog's certain stillness and taken hold of him without asking. He thought about 8 months of fixing things and never staying, and he found when he reached for the old urge to drive that for some reason he could not find it anywhere inside himself. "I think I might stay a while," he said, and it surprised him to hear it. And it did not surprise Cinder at all. The dog stood, shook the snow from his coat, and looked toward the diner, and its warm window, ready, the way he was always ready, to walk wherever Holloway walked next. If you have ever wondered whether one person paying attention can still matter in a world built to look away, hold on to this. A man can lie 9 days in a cold room and be a number on a soft cardboard tag. And then one morning someone reads the name and the whole arithmetic of forgetting comes apart. The work is quiet. It is folding a flag right. It is making one phone call. It is refusing to drive home when the leash goes stiff in your hand and your dog sits down in front of a thing and will not move. You may never carry a casket, but you will somewhere, someday, find a name that no one has read, and you will get to choose whether you read it. May God bless you and keep you. May He keep your own name from being forgotten. And may someone always be willing to fold your flag right and stand beside you in the cold and hold the door.